Welcome all to today's e-talk here at the Hynes Institute for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Iona College. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jonathan Williams, and I'm a clinical lecturer here at the Hynes Institute. So the format of today's talk is that of a fireside chat. So we're going to get to hear a firsthand account of entrepreneurship, and then have the opportunity to really dialogue with our guest, Alyssa, to learn more about her entrepreneurial journey. So I will say that dialogues are typically only successful when it's a two-way dialogue. Would really love to have folks chat some comments out, or raise your hand and actually join in the conversation. Alyssa is a very approachable person, so ask questions and add your comment into this. So with that, I'm excited to welcome our guest, Alyssa Pressler. Alyssa, if you were on campus, Iona is a beautiful campus, but we're doing it virtually to welcome you to Iona today. Alyssa Pressler is the owner of That's Novel Books. That's Novel Books is an indie used bookstore in Charlotte, North Carolina that offers books and a space for book lovers. So Alyssa founded That's Novel Books in early 2020. And it survived a global pandemic at this point. It's pivoted on a dime, and I think most importantly has established some strategic partnerships to ensure the success of the business along the way. So Alyssa is a graduate of the Rochester Institute of Technology, graduating with a BS in Journalism and International and Global Studies. So welcome, Alyssa.
Thank you.
So excited to have you. There we go. Wonderful. So Alyssa,
yes,
to get us started, before we actually hop into learning more about the business itself, I want to start with your passions and your interest, right? So you're really interested and passionate about books, right? And I think that's a key piece of this story. So tell us more about that and kind of where that interest came from.
Yeah. So it's funny, if I think back to my early experiences with reading, I actually hated it. I hated books when I was in kindergarten learning to read. But I think my mom, first off, really pushed me to keep reading. And then I always saw her reading books, which, I think was a great model for me. And then in first grade, they made it a competition. And if anyone knows the Enneagram, or even if you buy into this astrology stuff, I'm a Capricorn, I'm an Enneagram 3, and I stereotypically play all of those things. So making reading a competition was a wonderful way to get me to dive into it fully. And I've been obsessed with it ever since. I was that kid who read under their desk in elementary school and get in trouble for it. I was the kid who got grounded from their books growing up because that was the only thing you could take away that would truly upset me. And that passion kind of grew. Throughout college, I didn't have very much time to read. And so after college, I decided I wanted to get back into it and made a goal to read more throughout the year. And that just kind of took off. I fell in love with it all over again, and wanted to find a way to connect with others when it came to books. And from there, I started what I call my Bookstagram, which is my Instagram, where all I do is talk about books. And it turns out there are a lot of other nerds like me out there. There's this huge Bookstagram community of, hundreds of thousands of Bookstagrammers out there. And we all just follow each other and talk about books and share the books we're reading. And it became a bigger thing than I ever imagined. So I was doing that for a few years, and that ultimately morphed into me wanting to create a physical space where people who love books could gather. And that's kind of where the beginning stages of That's Novel Books came from.
Yeah, Alyssa, that's perfect. And I know folks in the Entrepreneurship 200 class that this talk is connected to, we spend a lot of time talking about what are we personally passionate about, right? And I think that you don't have to have passion to make something financially lucrative, right? Or to develop a venture around it. But I think it helps, right? If you hated books, Alyssa, you would probably not be in the spot that you're at today.
Probably not. Probably wouldn't enjoy it as much. That's for sure.
Right. No. I had one of those programs in school as well. Accelerated Reader, I think, was the name of it, right? That I don't know, making books a competition, definitely. And you would get a balloon bouquet or something like that if you read enough at the end of the year. So
mine was a pizza certificate, which, like, competition speaks to my soul, and then pizza, free pizza. It was like I was done for.
right,
Yeah.
right, yeah, celebrating that. So before we tell me more about the Bookstagram, right? That like, how did you just start posting on Instagram and like the community kind of followed, or like, did you get strategic about what you were posting? What happened there to kind of, tap into this book community?
Yeah. So it happened that a friend of mine started a Bookstagram. And so I began following her postings about books. And then from there, she would share other Bookstagrammers that she liked. And I followed more and more, all on my personal account, where I didn't talk about books much, because I was like, 90% of the people who follow me don't care about the books that I'm reading or anything like that. But I wanted to talk about books with someone. My husband's not a reader. My mom's a reader, but totally different style of reading. So it was just, I felt kind of like isolated in my passions. So yeah, after following a bunch of these Bookstagrammers for a bit, I reached out, asked for their advice on starting my own, and most of them were like, "You just got to do it."
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. I just did it, and it was a really fun creative outlet for me in terms of figuring out how to take artsy pictures of my books, and figuring out what to post every single day. And then also just getting to meet more people. We have probably a good 20 to 30 Bookstagrammers here in Charlotte, where I'm located, alone. And a lot of these folks are my friends now in person. Like, we don't just talk on the internet, but I know them. I have their numbers. I've met their kids. They've met my kid. And so it's blossomed to so much more than just this internet community, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, Alyssa, that really resonates. And I think, I often say, well, it's great to have a passion, right? But it's even better if you can find someone that shares that passion with you, right? Which sounds kind of what you've done in this case, right? You started your, maybe you set out to start a bookstore, right? But in some sense, you kind of found a community first, and then you went from there. So.
Yeah, definitely.
Wonderful. All right, so that makes sense. So tell us a little bit more about kind of the origin story of That's Novel Books, and kind of, you have this passion and interest for books. How do you take the passion and actually translate it into, oh, I have a viable venture opportunity that I can kind of start to build and organize around?
Yeah. So I had always wanted to, at some point, start a bookstore or own a bookstore. It was like that pipe dream of, when I retire, I'm going to open up this business that I love, and I'm just going to spend my days reading books and helping people pick out books. Like, what a great way to spend my retirement, working. So I always had this goal, and then I would, talk about it with my husband, and we had this idea of, he's not a reader but loves beer, and like we could combine the efforts, and we would call it the library, and there would be a bar and you could drink and you could walk around, and there'd be live events and actual seating areas. I don't know how many of you are into books or bookstores like me, but most of the bookstores are filled with books, which is obviously wonderful, but there's no place to sit and look through all of the books, which is how you end up on the floor with stacks of books and all these things. So I had these grandiose visions for what I wanted my bookstore to look like one day. And then I had just come back from a trip to Nashville, where I had gone to a bunch of used bookstores and just kind of fallen in love with the idea of owning one again. And I was sitting actually in the bookstore right now, and in my space, and it was empty at that point. It was a space that's attached to my full-time job, which is at a co-working space here in Charlotte. And it was empty, and myself and my boss were sitting here going, what can we do with this space? It's too great to be just an office for somebody, because it has this gorgeous garage door, and it's so light and airy. We didn't want it to just be an office. We didn't want it to be meeting space. We wanted it to be something more meaningful. And I very jokingly said to him, I'd like to, or you should let me open a bookstore here, because I had just come back from this trip. And he was like, well, if you were to open a bookstore, how would you do it? Very jokingly, not serious at all, was like, well, I'd put the shelves over here, and I'd do a seating area, and we'd host live events, and this is how I would set it up. And he was like, well, where would you get the books? And I was like, well, it would be used books, so we could get donations, and we go to estate sales. And I just was not serious in this conversation whatsoever, but he saw something in it and was excited about how excited I was and said, okay, get me a business plan. And so we had that conversation, I want to say end of November 2019. And by February 28th, 2020, we had opened the bookstore up to the public. So it was very fast from there. We moved pretty quickly.
Yeah. So I'm just going to replay some of that, right? So you're like still a full-time employee.
Yes.
While pursuing, this entrepreneurial venture. You're not delaying your passion until retirement to act on it. You can merge both of those together while still working at your full-time job, which I think is fantastic, right? And I think there's this notion that to follow an entrepreneurial pursuit, sometimes we have to wait, right? Like we can delay it, but it's like, no, I'm actually following those pursuits within the context of the full-time role that I'm already having right now. And, I don't have to wait or delay to do that. Tell us more about your boss. He sounds like a really cool boss if he's willing to say, tell me about this bookstore, he sounds like a cool human.
He is pretty cool. Don't tell him I told you that.
Okay.
We were just talking today about how we've moved beyond the boss-employee relationship and we're basically just colleagues and friends at this point. So I pick on him a lot, but truly I would not be here if it weren't for him. He is a small business owner himself. The co-working space I work for is a small business. So I think he saw how passionate I was about books, and he's not a big reader. But for some reason he was intrigued by it and intrigued by what I wanted to do. And basically he's the one who gave me the startup money to get everything in place to open a brick and mortar business, which is quite expensive. So yeah, I'm not really, I wish I had the ego to be like, well, I'm just great. And he's cool and saw that I had this ability to do this, but I'm not really sure what he saw in me or in the vision. But something about it caught his eye and he was like, let's go for it. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. We tried it out, but why not,
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty cool to find somebody who has that why not attitude and have it work out so well for you.
Right. And I mean, me not knowing anything, right? There's probably a piece of, he wanted to invest in you, right? In your ideas. Right. Yeah. But I mean, there's also probably a piece of, he thought it would support the larger brand, right? Of that he's building within the co-working space, right? I think that they support the goals there actually support each other, right? The goals of the bookstore actually enhances the co-working enhances the bookstore, right? That they're kind of symbiotic in the relationship that they form. Yeah. So he said, give me a business plan. And I think business plans look like a ton of different things. What did yours look like, Alyssa? There's no right format for a business plan. How did you put your ideas down on paper? Because honestly, I think that's really hard to do, is to say, I have all these ideas. How do I condense them down to like flat paper with words on them?
It was very hard to do. Actually, I remember messaging him back and forth, like, what do you want included? Should I make it pretty? Like, do you want me to design it up? He's a very design-oriented guy. And he finally was like, just type some things on a Google Doc and send it to me, thankfully. So I did not get very fancy with it. I don't know if I can share my screen with you guys, but
I think you'll be able to, Alyssa.
Okay, I do actually. I've never done this before. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, it's perfect.
All right, here is my initial business plan. As you can see, it is just a Google Doc. It's my business name is That's Novel Books, but we started with the library, my original idea. And this was the original iteration of it. So I wrote out my vision for what I ultimately wanted for my business. I thought that was extremely important. Talked about some of the things that I felt like the Charlotte bookstore scene was missing and things that we could do differently. And then I broke down a lot of the costs that I felt would be associated with at least starting it up. Talked about monthly expenses. Obviously, we were going to do food and drinks and all sorts of things. The ultimate business ended up very different from this vision, which I think was interesting as I was looking at it earlier. came up with a price list in terms of how much I thought I should price things based on the monthly operating costs, areas we could grow, and then a wish list of things. So this was my very, I'll stop screen sharing now. That was my very basic business plan. And if you look at what it started out as and what my business became, it's completely different, which I think is super interesting.
Yeah. Do you do food or anything like that now, or is it just strictly books?
We don't. It's strictly books. We did offer coffee for a while, and the plan was to expand that. But there are coffee shops and a lot of coffee and food related places immediately surrounding us. So we ultimately figured out that it was just not a viable avenue for us to spend our efforts. You know, it was costing more money and we were wasting a lot in terms of how much we threw out at the end of the night, that we decided food and drink we just needed to stay in our lane with the books, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Well, you tested it though, right? Like you kind of dipped your toe in the coffee. It's a hot pool of water to dip your toe into, right? But like you dipped your toe in it, it didn't work, right? And you kind of like said, well, what's my strengths? And we played to that.
Yes.
Wow. That was awesome. But it was like, that was 2 pages, but it was super concise in terms of this is what I wanted to do. And this is how much I think we're going to make and it's going to cost and that sort of thing. It's kind of back of the napkin, but really effective at communicating on that front.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's see. So you wrote the business plan. Your boss was like, Alyssa, it's amazing. Let's do it. What happened? Tell us about like opening the I mean, I've never opened a physical location of a business, right? That seems really daunting to me to think through that. What was that process like?
Yes. So I wish he had come back and said, this is amazing, let's not change anything. But it was actually a long back and forth process of, he didn't like the name. He felt like it pigeonholed us too much. You know, decor changes and stuff. So there was a lot of back and forth with the business plan and a lot of give and take there. And that's how we ended up being called That's Novel Books, because we knew we were always going to have books, but who knows what else we might add in the future. So I thought that was really wise business advice that he gave me. If I called myself the Library, and you know, at this point, I still don't have a liquor license. It's incredibly difficult to get down here in North Carolina. It would have been weird. So not weird to go into a bookstore called That's Novel Books. So there was a lot of back and forth. And then eventually he just, sounds incredibly privileged, and I do want to acknowledge that. He eventually just gave me a credit card that he had open for Huga Co-working, which was the primary business. I was operating the bookstore as a sub-brand underneath his business. So I didn't have to file an LLC at that point. Didn't have to really do any of the tax work or anything like that. He gave me a credit card with a $15,000 limit and was basically like, put it together, kid. So from there, it was a lot of sourcing. I did a lot of work sourcing the books, was probably what took the most amount of time. Getting bookshelves, getting all the furniture that I knew we were going to need in the space, so that the physical space felt good, but also working on the marketing and branding part. So that's what my full-time job is with Huga. I'm the director of marketing. So it was very important to me that we had a strong marketing presence. I also think that books as an online community is such a strong part of why I was doing what I was doing, that I wanted to recreate that with my bookstore online presence as well. So we did a lot of marketing, a lot of lead up press, and work with that. And yeah, just kind of worked our tails off until it was ready to open.
What does lead up press look like, Alyssa, for folks that might not know what that is?
Yeah, so we reached out to a couple of the different organizations that we knew would be interested in reporting on something like that. There are a lot of lifestyle magazines and newspapers and stuff like that. So we essentially reached out to our contacts there. I used to work in journalism, so I had a lot of contacts myself that I could reach out to directly. And then Garrett, who is my former business owner and my boss, my former co-business owner and my boss, also has a really strong presence in Charlotte, runs an extremely successful co-working space. So he was able to pull on his contacts as well. And we basically just reached out and said, this is the scoop. It was happening in a very exciting area. We're in a revitalized industrial park, so they might hear the construction going on behind me actually. So it just kind of worked out where we reached out to quite a few organizations and they were all super interested. And then once we had a couple of people write a story about us, we had more reach out and want to do more work with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like a snowball, right? You kind of like package up like, hey, here's a really good story, right? And you kind of like put that into some hands, and suddenly, well, they saw the story in one place, right? And someone else picks up the story, right? And it's kind of this ebb and flow of like people wanting to pick up the story, which is a great strategy for, kind of spreading the word.
I'll say I didn't do like an official press release or something. Actually, as a former journalist, I cannot stand press releases. So I'm really glad that I had a group of contacts that I could basically send a paragraph and let them know what was happening. I personally think as a former journalist, that's the better way to go about it. Press releases, your inbox gets so bogged down with it. So if you're ever looking to do lead a press or press for anything, I say keep it super simple and just go with a quick email, honestly.
Dropping wisdom, Alyssa. Yes. You're like, yeah, there's a trick of the trade. Yeah. No, I love it. Yeah, it's like a formal press release. Who needs that, right? It's like, what's the nugget of what's going on, right? And you share that broadly, right? And see who can help there. This is kind of backtracking just 2 seconds to go back to the business plan, but one thought that just came to mind is like, you use the business plan as a tool to have a conversation with someone about your idea. And I think that is the value of that document that we just looked at. I think so many people set out by writing a business plan thinking, this is the thing that we're actually going to make. This is the thing that's actually going to be developed. But you use it as a way of, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think about it, right? Like, you don't like the name? Fine, we can change the name, right? Maybe we won't get a liquor license. That's fine. We'll keep iterating on it. So that's great to see that you've used it in that way. And I think that's what a business plan or business model should be used, is simply just to communicate the idea, to have a conversation with a stakeholder down the line.
Absolutely. And I think maybe it might have looked different if I had been hoping to get more formal investors, or if I was a formal startup hoping to ultimately, sell my business or something. But knowing that I was a small business owner with the goal of owning my own business outright, I think I got to be a little bit more relaxed with it. And even if I were a startup, I think I would start with a personal business plan like what I created, just for my own purposes. And it becomes this living, breathing document that changes. Nothing is set in stone with a business plan.
Yeah, but you secured funding, right? And I think that's what matters. And $15,000 is nothing to sneeze at in terms of someone believing in your idea and saying, here's the startup seed capital to go do that. Like, that's really amazing. So got a ton of momentum going up, to like the opening. Like, Alyssa, talk us through, because like you opened right when like COVID was like starting to be a thing that we didn't really know what was going to happen. And you're a physical business. What I don't know, what happened in that time? I would be like shaking in my boots if I were you, and maybe you were during that time.
I think I disassociated a little bit. Looking back on it, I'm surprised I didn't freak out more than I did, to be honest. So we opened up February 28th was our grand opening, had this big bash, huge party. The entire space was filled with people to where you could barely move. It was so much fun. Can you guys even remember doing that? I can't even imagine being in a room right now that close to people. It just gives me so much anxiety. COVID was like something that was like kind of rumbling off into the distance, but no one was really talking about it here. Maybe they were, and I was just in this bubble of trying to get my business open, but I was not expecting it to hit the US and for everything to shut down. I didn't know really what was happening over in Europe, and have any idea what was coming. So we opened up February 28th. We ran for 3 weekends in a row. And on the third Friday, I made the decision to shut down completely. At that point, so that was early March, things weren't bad yet, but there was a couple of local businesses in Charlotte that kind of came out ahead of the curve and said, this looks like it's going to get bad. And before it does, we're going to just shut our doors and say, going out for a beer, because there was a lot of breweries, or going out to do this is not important. What's important is that we stay home and try not to let this spread. So I decided I want to be one of those businesses kind of leading the way. I shut myself down completely. And we remained fully closed until, I want to say, early August. So no one, I spent all this time building this physical space for people to gather in, and nobody could come gather here. And that was tough. Mm-hmm. I think it was it's more difficult now looking back on it, because I don't think we're ever going back to normal. But at that point, we were all like, oh, it's one more week will be closed, and then everything's going to be back to normal. One more week and we'll be, one more month maybe. And then we'll be opened up and we'll be having parties again and hugging each other. And I don't see a world where that's happening again mm-hmm. anymore. So I've kind of come to terms with it. But then I was very much so in denial and kind of going along with, soon, maybe by the fall we'll be opened up again. Yeah, so it was a weird way to start a business, that's for sure.
Yeah. Did the co-working space also shut down at the same time, or okay?
The co-working space made the decision to close its doors to members, I want to say 1 week after I made the decision to shut down. Maybe not even that long. So it was pretty quick. Yeah, so on all fronts, I was just like twiddling my thumbs, like, what do I do? Right. My life now? Both of my jobs are just like stagnant. It was a very weird time.
Yeah. So what did you do? Because the business was still open. You still had, open in the sense of like you could sell books to someone. Like how do you sell books with no wall? Like when they can't come in the store, right? Like what did you do during that time, Alyssa? Or did you sell anything?
I did sell books. So my business is unique in that it's used books. So it's tough for me to sell things online, because with used books especially, I think people want to see the quality of the book, and make sure that it's something that they believe is fair for the price. It's not like buying a new book where you're going to get a brand new book for that price. $5 book, that might mean it has a couple of tears in it, or maybe someone wrote all over in it that might not bother one person but might bother another. So there was no real way for me to transition my business online like a lot of other retail shops did. So what I did instead was posted that I would give book recommendations to anybody who wanted them, and would basically suggest books for them based on books they had read recently or their favorite books, etc. So they would message me and say, these are the last 3 books I read. I want something along these lines. What do you got for me? And I'd go through my entire inventory of, probably a good 2,000 to 3,000 books, and say, all right, here are 6 options that I think are great for you. And then they could say, I hate all of those. What about this, this, and this? And then I'd go back and find more recommendations. Looking back on it now, probably not the greatest use of my time, but what the heck else was I going to be doing anyway? Right. So I actually generated, not a lot of business, but a good portion of business by doing that, by offering book recommendations to folks. I also do these things called blind dates with a book, which I can go grab one for you and show you all what that looks like. But essentially I wrap the book up and I put almost what I like to say is a Tinder's profile worth of information on the front of it. So you have no idea what the book is inside of the wrapping. You just have this bare bones kind of description, and you decide if you'd like it or not. And people go nuts for it. It's easily my bestseller and the most popular item. So I would post these blind dates that I created every single day, and people would comment sold, and then they would come pick them up through contactless pickup. So I would literally just bag things up and set them outside my door, and someone would run up at 2 p.m. and grab their package and run away. Mm-hmm. So that was basically how I operated from March to July, give or take. And then at that point, things were looking a little bit better. More businesses were opening. So what I did was I would open up my garage door in the bookstore and sit out in my patio area with maybe 5 tables of books. So no one could browse my full inventory, but they could come shop outside. Masks were required at all times. I would be going around with this antibacterial spray and stuff like that. And I'd be spraying the books and trying not to get them too wet, but trying to make sure that they were like clean enough that people could touch. Because at that point, we had no idea how COVID spread, right? So we all thought like it was through contact. So I'd be spraying books and masked up and sweating in July heat in North Carolina so that people could come browse books. And we did some sales that way too.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like the blind date with a book stuck around though, following COVID, that intense period there. Did the book recommendations stick around at all?
Yep, I still have people who will message me and say, hey, I just finished this book. Do you have, anything in your store that's like it or that you would recommend based on it? And yeah, I give a lot of book recommendations. I don't necessarily advertise it, but I do try and help people out as much as possible.
Yeah, so everybody on this call, email Alyssa like a book.
It's really one of my favorite parts of the job, but it is extremely time consuming, particularly if you are someone who is interested in genres that I don't read a ton of.
Right.
It becomes much more difficult and involves a lot more research. So I love it, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's an entrepreneurial idea right there for folks listening, right? Like a kind of a book recommendation algorithm that a bookstore could use based on their inventory that could be scanned in. Yeah, because that is time consuming, Alyssa, but it's highly personal service. And I think that's why people are interested in it. Yeah. You can't replace, you can't replace it. You might like this book recommendation with someone that actually knows your interests and what you've actually read in the past. Excellent. So let's see. I know that, and when I think of the book marketplace, I think of like Amazon, right? Like there's this like £1 million gorilla and elephant and antelope, like I kind of all combined into one that is Amazon. It's a crowded marketplace for books, and something we've been talking a lot about in the entrepreneurship class is this notion of like secret sauce, right? That there's each business has something about it that makes them unique and distinct, and that's why they're in business, right? Is that they're doing something that other people can't replicate, right? And that's what we would define as their secret sauce. What do you think yours is? Like, what do you think your secret sauce is, Alyssa? I can think of a couple. You got a lot of things going that it might be your secret sauce, but interested to hear your take.
Yes. So I will say, first and foremost, privilege and luck is a lot of my secret sauce. Obviously, I was extremely privileged to be given the opportunity to do this, to be given a space for free for so long, to be able to do it, and then be given the startup money. I did pay all of that back, actually. 3 months ago, I completely paid back my startup costs, and now I'm the sole owner of my bookstore. My former co-owner is still my boss and colleague, so it's an interesting situation. But I do think that that's important to note, privilege and luck in terms of how this all came out to be. But beyond that, I think one of the key things that has helped the business succeed is its location in a revitalized industrial park that's really up and coming in the area. It's a very walkable area with a lot of other retail shops, restaurants, coffee shops, and soon to come offices and apartments and all of these things. So I benefit greatly from the foot traffic in the area and the number of other local small businesses who we all kind of support each other and give love to each other and try and drive people to shop at all of our businesses, which has been incredible. So I think that's part of it. In addition, at least when I opened up last year, there were not a ton of bookstores in Charlotte. A couple more have been added since I opened, but it was really only me and 2 others. And this is a fairly decent sized city. There was only one other used bookstore in like the city proper, and the other one was an indie bookstore that's all new books. So I think that there was kind of a book desert. And obviously there's a huge community of book readers out there. If there's 30 bookstagrammers and even more closeted book nerds out there who don't post about it on the internet. So I felt like I opened up at a good time in terms of I was able to establish myself while there still weren't that many book options. And then I think maybe the final piece of it is I really paid attention to the space. I created a lot of areas in the store that felt very Instagrammable. It sounds very millennial cliche, but it's free marketing. You know, people love to come into my entryway, and there's this, the walls are covered with pages, and they take pictures and they post and they tag me, and that drives more people to me. Or I have this mural on the back wall that has book quote on it. People love to take pictures there, and that's free marketing. So I think that helps a lot too. A lot of other bookstores are just focused on the books, which by and large are the most important thing. Absolutely. But I wanted to create more of an experience for people. Mm-hmm. Sounded very icky the way I said that, but yeah, I hope you all know what I mean. Like,
yeah, experience is paramount these days, right? It's no longer just enough to have a physical product, right? That it's the total experience that product is wrapped in.
Absolutely.
You're speaking like a true marketing person, Alyssa. You're thinking, I'm creating these spaces where marketing like occurs in the store, and I'm like leveraging my community to propagate that, which is great. But it also sounds like you're really in tune to your local market, right? Like do you do any sort of online business at the moment, or is it strictly in Charlotte? What does that look like?
So I do, I use Printful. Not sure if many folks will know what that is, but essentially it's a third-party site where I can design t-shirts and merchandise and stuff like that for folks to buy. They purchase it through my website, but the order goes through Printful. They make all of it, they ship it and handle it, and send it to people. So you can purchase That's Novel Books merchandise online through me, but not the physical books. I haven't quite figured out a good way to do that. And it's something I'm looking more into now. I'm hoping maybe I can sell really nice limited edition copies, or if I'm finding, antique copies of books and things like that, I'd be able to sell those online a little easier than my full just general inventory of used books. So always exploring different avenues and trying to figure out how I can have a few different buckets to draw from. You never want your revenue stream coming from only one thing, because you never know when a global pandemic might shut you down physically. So I'm still working on some online streams as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I was thinking, right, because when you were talking about your secret sauce, being in the book desert, right, kind of like saying that there is not a lot of competition, right? Like why isn't there a bookstore? Maybe I can be that provider in that space, right? And then picking what neighborhood in Charlotte? I mean, I know Charlotte, so what
it's the Druid Hills neighborhood, if you want to get specific about it. Okay. The actual industrial site that we're in is called Camp North End.
Okay. Oh, it's in Camp North End. Got it. Yeah. So you're in like an area where economic activity is happening, right? Like people are looking there to locate new things. I know economic development regions are typically pretty hip and trendy, right? And a bookstore is a nice addition to that kind of market. So, and yeah, acknowledging the privilege and luck that came along with your once co-founder, right? The notion of privilege and that positionality within entrepreneurship is really quite central, right, to the success of certain enterprises and businesses. I think even students on this call, right, sometimes you might not think about it, but the inherent privilege that we have of talking about entrepreneurship and just having the ability to test an idea, even within the context of a class, and fail, how much that puts us in a position of privilege, that if that were to happen in the real world, there could be huge financial implications, or you might not be able to feed your family for a month if you invested in that entrepreneurial idea. So yeah, Alyssa, thanks for bringing that into the conversation, because it definitely, while it is a secret sauce, I think in getting you started, it's definitely one to make note of.
Yeah.
So what's next for That's Novel Books?
Sure. Well, so we're undergoing a lot of changes right now. So I'm officially the sole owner of That's Novel Books. It is my baby, my business. I get to do whatever the heck I want with it now, which is very exciting, and leaves me a little bit daunted. So for the bookstore as a brand, what's next is I'm hoping to develop more merch, online revenue streams, like I had mentioned before, and looking at different ways that I can build community and also create revenue streams for myself outside of just my physical presence in Camp North End. So always looking to diversify that. As for the physical space, that is actually changing. We, as the bookstore, proved viability in having a retail shop here. My former co-owner, now boss, still kind of.
It's weird, right? Like
a weird relationship. No one gets it. I don't get it. But we are looking to create more of a shop collective, which I'm super excited about because I think it's going to draw even more traffic to my brand, but also a lot of other small retail businesses that are just like me, where I probably can't afford a space this nice on my own. And there are a lot of small retail businesses that are in the exact same boat that want to start out somewhere, but have to settle for pop-ups or online only, which comes with taxes and stuff like that you have to consider. So we're essentially creating a collective / incubator for businesses exactly like me, where they will be able to come in, create a certain space for themselves to sell their products and goods, and hopefully realize the viability of their business and leave us and go open their own brick and mortar. So that is coming. We're working on it right now. I can actually show you the current construction zone that is the space.
Oh, wow.
Shelves over here. So my bookstore is over to the right. That is still operational, but we're undergoing a lot of changes to hopefully bring even more brands and vendors in, create even more foot traffic for all of us, and also get a little help in terms of running the physical space of the store, because right now that falls solely on me and I still have my full-time job. So it's a lot all at once.
Mm-hmm. So would it be that there would be like maybe a single person that would man the entirety of the space? Is that kind of the idea there, Alyssa?
Yeah, so it'll in the vendor contract, essentially everyone will be required to work up to 2 4-hour shifts every single month, and we're hoping to have approximately 20 to 25 different brands or vendors in here so that we can kind of split that across everyone, be open for more days a week. But I will actually be the general manager of the space, so I'll be kind of managing all of the inventory, schedules, everything. As well as being a vendor myself. So I kind of get to wear 2 hats, which is exciting and daunting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's exciting because you get it. I mean, it's very rare that you get to define the brands that sit alongside of your brands, especially in the retail world, right? That you get the chance to do that. And hopefully you find brands that are like sustaining, right? And that they actually amplify the kind of the work that you've done. Yeah. And so you'll be the anchor tenant in that space, and kind of you set the tone for what the other tenants brands will look like.
Yes, yep, that's kind of the goal. I'm the anchor tenant, so I have signed on as a contract for That's Novel Books to be in the space for 1 year. And at that point, I'll kind of take a look at my options and figure out, is this a viable enough business that I could pursue full time? Maybe my full-time job becomes the bookstore at that point, and I can get my own space and run my own store and do it on my own. Or maybe it just works better as a collective and I have a lot of fun doing that. So that's also what's coming. We'll see if That's Novel Books branches out in the future.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's like you've proven viability on some level, right? And you're saying, let's up the ante a little bit more. Can we prove viability there, right? So you're continually doing these tests of viability, and you're doing it in a really sustainable and safe context, right? Because to go open a bookstore, and say sign like a 5-year lease to see if it works, that's really risky, right? You're figuring out, how do I test my idea? How do I validate hypotheses that I have, but do it in a way that's smart from a business standpoint, especially a financial standpoint.
Yes, absolutely. Like you said, there's never a point where I want to not be able to feed my family for a month. So it's always towing that line of how much can I devote to myself, to my own personal business, while also making sure financially I'm still secure, my family is still secure, and that we can survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's important, right? That's important for those things to be taken care of. Well, I don't know, that's a really exciting opportunity, and I know that the physical space has meant a lot to the business currently, right? But like having it reimagined is always a fun task as well. So, um, last question, I think, from me to you, Alyssa, and then I'm sure some folks have some other questions. But like, this Zoom is full of folks that are interested in entrepreneurship or they're taking a class in entrepreneurship, right? So they've got some ideas, I think is a safe assumption to make. What, you've already dropped a couple of nuggets of wisdom, but what advice would you give, Alyssa, to someone who's kind of thinking about starting their own venture? Like what, think back to yourself a couple years ago, like what do you wish you would have heard at that moment in time?
Okay, that's a great question. Number one would be talk about your dreams, talk about your passions, talk about what you love to do. Because if I had never said to someone jokingly, I want to open a bookstore, I wouldn't be here. If I had never said that to my boss / former co-owner, wouldn't be here. All it took was me talking about my passions and him following me on Instagram and seeing how the community I built and how much I love books for him to believe in me and believe in my idea. So share your ideas. Obviously, if it makes sense to, don't give everyone your secret sauce by any means so that they can just take it and do it themselves, but share your ideas. Don't be afraid to connect with people about that. And do it in a genuine way. I didn't go to Garrett and say, I want money to start a bookstore. It started out as a very genuine conversation of me talking about my passions and him saying, let's do it. So I think that's a really good piece of advice that I would give, because you never know what's going to come out of that. Another piece of advice I would give would be to kind of, along the lines of what we were just saying, do it as safe as possible. There is going to be a point down the road, maybe sooner rather than later, where I decide it's time to jump fully into my bookstore and see where I can really take this thing. Until then, I want to make sure that I am secure enough to be able to grow my store, make sure it's viable, test my hypotheses. So figure out ways to do that. Get creative. Maybe it's you start a small Etsy shop, or you sell some things on Instagram and you figure out your costs and stuff like that. Just go slow, I think, is what I'm trying to say here. There's no reason to rush all in and open up a brick and mortar store and put yourself into debt before you're truly ready for it. So go slow, figure out some ways you can test and figure things out. And you will learn a lot along the way, and everything will change and be different, but hopefully you'll be better for it.
Mm-hmm. Wow, mic drop, right? That's great, Alyssa, right? And I think, yeah, sharing your passions. And I think if you do that with people, like you said, in a really genuine way, you get people that want to join your passions too, right? They'll find that you either have similar passions or you don't share passions. And that's okay as well, that you find out that you don't share passions with someone. And then, right, I love this, go slow, but find ways to test. There are moments when you have to act quickly.
For sure.
And of course act quickly, right? But in certain instances, the timing is in your court, right? You're the leader, you're the owner, right? You're driving the car, right? And you get to determine how to make those new moves and navigate. But yeah, I test the hypothesis. If you can validate it, you take that piece of knowledge, you keep moving forward, and you build a venture around it. That's the way to do it. What are your feelings on audiobooks, Alyssa? Maybe we start there.
Love them. Big fan. Especially, I'm a new mom. I had a baby 7 months ago, and reading a physical book is really hard for me. So I love audiobooks. I firmly believe they are books. Science agrees with me. When you listen to an audiobook, the same parts of your brain are activated as when you read a physical book. And if you do not believe audiobooks are books, you are probably subscribing to some ableist cultures there. So.
Are you planning on incorporating our audiobook sales? Is there a way to, like, I don't know, like, is there a third party way to like sell those and get a piece of it?
There is. There's an incredible company called Libro.fm. And essentially it allows small bookstores like myself to offer audiobooks to folks. So I did send an email over to Libro FM to kind of get set up on their platform about 2 weeks ago. And it's something I'm looking into again to help diversify that revenue stream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, don't do Audible because that's owned by Amazon and Jeff Bezos does not need your money. Check out Libro FM and you're actually able to you sign on and support a local bookstore through that organization. Highly recommend them.
Got it. No, that's all about diversifying income streams, and that's a great way to do it. I've been meaning to get commuting now, like being back on campus, right? It's like a great time to hop back into the audiobooks.
I love Libby, by the way, too. Libby, which is the library app. All you need is a library card and you can hook up to that and you can get audiobooks and ebooks on there. And I love supporting my library. They are not in competition with bookstores. So Libby app for anybody interested.
All right. Let's see. So I'll read off some of these questions for you, Alyssa. So Georgina says, did you start receiving profit right away? If not, how long did it take to start gaining profit?
So I remained in debt, in my startup debt, until about end of July this year. August 1, I think, was the first month that I officially made a profit off of the business. I had paid off all of my startup costs, and I haven't, my business is profitable in that I have money in the bank and I'm in the green. It's not profitable in that I'm paying myself. I do not pay myself for the business at all right now. I'm actually reinvesting and spending a lot of time reinvesting in the business currently to try and grow it now that I am out of debt from the startup costs. Mm-hmm. So it took about a year and a half for it to become profitable. And I think it would have been quicker had the pandemic not slowed things down a little bit.
Yeah. And so just to kind of dissect that a little bit more, right? Like we're talking about profit. So profit is meaning like, you know, you're paying everything off and there's some money left in the bank at the end of the day, right? So a business can realize revenue, right? So I can bring in money, but I might have more costs than money I'm actually bringing in, right? So you can be bringing in money, but still losing money at the end of the day when all is kind of tallied out. So
thank you for, so I was always making money at the bookstore. It was just all going off, paying off that credit card that my boss gave me that had all the startup costs and the interests on it.
Yeah. Revenue versus profit is something we haven't talked about yet. We're still developing our venture ideas, right? The finances will come shortly.
I love it.
Let's see. E-Man says audiobooks aren't books. Now I'm playing. Okay. we've got someone willing to challenge you, Alyssa.
Oh no.
Do you have a vision board? Do you do affirmations or anything that gets your mind in an elevated headspace geared towards reaching your goals?
I love that question. Wow. Oh, I love that question. I don't vision board necessarily, at least not for the bookstore specifically, but I do a lot of journaling. And I have this planner specifically called the Passion Planner. It is a small business, small minority, LGBTQ owned business that I've supported for years that has this planner that's all about achieving personal and work goals and reflecting on yourself and how you spend your time and where you want to grow personally and professionally. So I spend a lot of time every single week kind of devoting myself to that, challenging myself and my ideas, and dreaming big and breaking it down into smaller steps to achieve things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Alyssa, do you have any like small business buddies that you, I don't know, like that you bounce ideas off of, or what do you do on that front?
Yes, I do. I have some incredible small business owners. Garrett, my former co-owner, is definitely one of them. I pick his brain about things all the time. I also have become very close with one of the brands that is already in my shop that actually kind of gave myself and Garrett the idea to become a collective. She runs apparel, but I love chatting with her and thinking of different ideas and things we could do. We always dream big of owning our own shop together, so that's always a lot of fun. And then I've become connected to a lot of the small local businesses that are immediately around my area, which has been so helpful because I can talk to them not only about business, but specifically business where we're at, what hours are best to be operating, how was last Saturday for you compared to this Saturday, what trends are you seeing year over year? So that's been really helpful.
Yeah, no, I don't know. There's always the self-reflection of like, how do I improve myself and how do I make sure I'm focused, right? But then it's like, how do I share that with others, right? To like either reinforce those passions or, to bounce an idea off of. That's important too.
And that's how you get a lot of great partnerships too, in terms of, you make stickers. I would love to commission you to make a sticker for my business, and then all sorts of things. So again, talk about your passions with people, because you will create an unrivaled network.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. So Kadarja is asking, what legal steps did you have to take to start your business?
So great question. At the beginning, no legal steps, because I was operating as a sub brand under the co-working space. I got really lucky and didn't have to worry about that. However, now that I am my own business and am separated officially from the co-working space, I did have to file for an LLC within my state. Every single state has different processes to go through that. But that was the first step, was to file for an official LLC, which at least in North Carolina, makes me an official business in the eyes of the state and the Secretary of the State. At that point, I get my tax ID number. And then from there, I am able to set up my own business bank account and kind of go from there.
Yeah. And those, LLC, limited liability company, that's the lingo there for that, right? So it's basically, we'll talk more about different business forms for folks in my class, but you set up the business because it kind of separates risk, right? That it's no longer Alyssa that's operating the bookstore, right? It's an entity that's operating the bookstore. So that's a really important distinction. And Alyssa, you had that initially, right? Because you had the original co-working brand, which was the entity operating the bookstore. And now you've just created another entity in which the bookstore is operating.
Exactly. So prior to August, when I officially, formed my entity, you could search for That's Novel Books on the Secretary of State's website, and it wouldn't show up because it was operating as Hygge Co-working. Now it's official. I'm an official, real, live legal business, which is very exciting and incredibly terrifying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, New York State has some interesting laws around starting LLCs. There's a publication requirement that's an interesting one. You have to give notice in like a public newspaper in a public place about, there's some interesting additional steps because I'm familiar with the North Carolina processes. So
I could imagine that New York State's is probably pretty daunting.
Right. Thanks, New York. Thanks, New York. Let's see. So Edwin, Edwin's got a question. How do you go about generating new ideas for your bookstore? In better words, what areas or people do you go into for new ideas? So how do you come up with new ideas, Alyssa, for your bookstore?
So kind of my answer earlier in terms of passion planning and stuff like that, I will literally just sit and set a timer and write down anything and everything, any idea I could possibly have, whether it's a terrible idea, whether I scrap it, I throw everything onto paper. And that helps tremendously because I'm able to look at that and then say, that's not viable. That's not viable. This is interesting. Hadn't really thought about that before. And then offshoot more ideas. So honestly, I'm a pen to paper kind of person. I like to just set a timer, 5 minutes for myself and throw everything up on a board or on a paper and go from there. I also visit a lot of bookstores and take pictures and gather ideas by seeing how other folks are doing it. I'm really lucky that the greater Charlotte area has a lot of bookstores that we're not competitive. We all know each other. We all email with each other. We're actually working on a bookstore crawl for this upcoming April and Indie Bookstore Day. So I'm able to go to a lot of them and ask questions and get ideas that way. And then I also just ask for feedback from my followers. Ask them, what are some things that you want to see? It helps if you have more pointed questions, what are some things that you wish that we would carry and stuff like that. And I kind of go from there.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So when you write out your list of ideas, Alyssa, like how do you make a judgment call on what's good or bad? I think, I don't know, I sometimes struggle with that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on, do you think people would come to it or buy it, or like, how do you base your base those decisions?
Sometimes it's by asking for feedback of the same, other bookstore owners, book lovers, even just my husband saying, do you think this would be cool or not? Am I totally off base here? So sometimes it's just getting a gut check from someone else. Oftentimes it's also to time. Time is money, which is the worst saying in the world, but it's true. Where I focus my efforts, I want to make sure that what I'm doing has the most impact, whether that's social good or revenue or, generation of something. So that helps me weed out a lot of things where like, this is a really cool idea, maybe not viable yet because I just don't have the time to devote to it for what it might be worth.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to think about it. Like, do I have the time to execute on it and to do it well, right? Like, I think that's,
Yes.
or if is it worth the effort, right? To put into it, because it could be a great idea, but just not worth the effort right now to do that.
100%.
Yeah, I heard the acronym the other day. It was like, what was it? LHF, low hanging fruit, right? That's what you're describing, right? It's like, what can I pick from the tree that's going to be, perfect for where I'm at right now, right?
Yes.
That it's easy to get to and has high impact.
Yes. And what can I save for later? I save those lists. So I look back on them all the time, and maybe down the road, something becomes much more viable for me, or something has changed, or I'm able to look at that idea and think that won't work, but this will, so it helps to, again, I'm a pen to paper kind of person. It helps to journal my thoughts and stuff like that and have that to look back on.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. We probably have time for one more question. If there's one more for Alyssa that somebody wants to ask. Let's see. Edwin has a question. So we'll ask this question and then I'll ask my question because now I really want to ask it. Edwin says, as a new business, do you gear to the up and coming generations or to the older generations? I think it's an interesting question given the kind of legacy of books. Or are you somewhere in the middle?
I think gosh, that's really interesting. I think you're right. I think it's somewhere in the middle in terms of my core clientele. I see I'm just so age myself here. I see all these young people come in and they typically want to take pictures and do the Instagrammable stuff, but aren't necessarily buying my books. Again, not too mad about it. It's technically free marketing. They're sharing that hopefully in wherever they share it. And it does drive more people to me. And then I see a lot of older folks come through as well, who are excited about the store, but may not buy a lot of books. A lot of them have their libraries established, or just, are like, oh, I have too many books to read at home. I think my target audience is really myself. And I see that in a lot of the clientele, a lot of folks, late 20s, early 30s, maybe into their 40s, who get just really jazzed about books. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I like it.
I don't know if I answered that well. So if I did, I'm sorry. Feel free to clarify.
Yeah, well, you've defined your target market, which is important. So last question, Alyssa, do you have a favorite book?
Oh, I hate this question.
Or a genre. We could even go with a genre of books. Yeah, we'll broaden it a little bit.
So that's the question that every book lover hates to get, because it's so impossible to choose just one favorite. It depends on my mood. It depends on the day and the season and all of the things. I will say I have a book that I believe has impacted my life the most, and that would be Half the Sky by Nicholas Kristoff and Cheryl Wu Dunn, who he's a journalist for the New York Times, and she is a financial banker, I believe. They wrote about their experience traveling to all of these different countries, exploring women's rights issues. And I read it in 9th grade, and it made me want to become a journalist, which is how I ended up at RIT in the journalism program, which is how I ended up in newspapers, which is how I ended up in Charlotte, which is how I ended up at the co-working space. And it just completely changed the trajectory of my life, and deeply touched me and made me a feminist and much more aware of international issues. So that's always my go-to answer. But honestly, I love so many books. It's impossible for me to choose just one. I could give you a list of top 10 maybe.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Well, no, I like that answer, right? Because there's a clear trajectory across your life, right? And how that book is impacted, which is probably where you're at today, at its core. So
absolutely.
Alyssa, this has been Amazing. Like I've learned so much about your story today, and you just made it happen, right? And I think there is something really to celebrate in terms of what you have accomplished already, and where you're going, right? I can't wait to do this conversation in like a year from now, and then see you in your own brick and mortar store. I think it'll be, fingers crossed, right? We'll
Fingers
test
crossed.
the viability and move forward from there. So
Exactly.
thanks again for joining us, Alyssa. And for folks in my classes, I will see you all in class on Wednesday. Okay, so have a good afternoon, folks.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Alyssa.